As the clock ticks and 2022 fast approaches, when interest payment of 237.4 million US dollars on Zambia's first Eurobond of 750 million US dollars contracted in 2012 will be due. Zambia is now considering Turkey for debt refinancing. Now, is this a desperate move, or is this the right direction to altering Zambia's fiscal trajectory? The name is Wenton Mavoro, and Biz-Week is what you're watching at this particular hour. My guest on the program this evening is Bright Chizonde from Center for Trade Policy and Development, who is an economist and researcher. Welcome to the program, Brighton.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Okay. Now, I know that, we've heard all these figures that I've just mentioned in the opening. One would be wondering, right now, where has this money gone? What have we spent it on?
Okay, I think the basic position of government is that most of the money was spent to plug the budget deficit. So our expenditure is usually above our revenue collection. So the understanding is that so government is spending beyond what it collects. So to plug the gap between expenditure and revenue collection, we have to get contract debt. So, but then the issue is what is driving our expenditure then, for it to be above the revenues. So most of the things that we have seen in the recent past is infrastructure development, creation of roads and other projects, and just mostly it is infrastructure which is the issue. So the government has been spending a lot of money on infrastructure projects. So that's what is plummeting up the expenditures.
Budget deficit, the challenge that we've been struggling with for some time now. And now, if this money was, contracted to cushion that deficit, and that has not happened, where is Zambia going wrong?
Okay, it's not really a problem to have a high or a gap in the difference between expenditure and revenue. It's not really a problem because our basic understanding of why we get debt is that when we contract more debt, debt can help us to grow our economy. By investing in capital generating activities. So we invest in capital and then our economy is going to grow if we invest well our money, the money that we get. So the understanding is that if we invest more, our economy will grow and then we'll have more revenues. When we have more revenues, we can collect more taxes. So that's the understanding, that debt is not really the problem itself, it's what we use it for.
Okay. Now, this money was particularly, gotten to ensure that at the end of the day, it ultimately pays for itself, and
yes.
One of the reasons was, to ensure that it is invested in infrastructure, particularly road construction. Now, coming back to that sector, we've seen that there has been quite some cost inflation at the moment.
Yeah.
So do we really see this money paying itself in any way, considering what is happening at the moment? Where our priorities right, or we contracted the money minus setting priorities?
I think that would be a very tricky statement to put across, but I think the understanding is, so far I think we have our priorities. We're not so sure where the money is going. Of course, infrastructure development is what has been put out there, that this is the thing that we spend money on. But we see inflated figures on the kind of roads, for example, and people have been talking about the cost of the roads that we are constructing. Is it the correct figures and all those issues? So our priorities should be put in check. We need to understand why we should contract debt. It's not just for consumption purposes. We shouldn't contract debt to consume. We should contract debt for investment purposes. Because if we are to invest using debt, it means that GDP is going to increase, and GDP increasing means ZRA will collect more revenues, and we'll be able to pay debts. So the fact that we are failing to pay our debts is a sign that the money was not invested correctly.
To participate on the program, all you have to do is simply dial 0950 936271 to give a comment and let us know what you think on the subject of debt refinancing. Is Zambia desperate? Now, debt has formed quite has actually dominated the conversation on the Zambian economic scene, and one of the things has been harmonization. What is the actual debt position that Zambia is sitting on at the moment?
That is a very complex question. I think we have two situations where we have official figures from the Ministry of Finance, And we have unofficial figures from international observers like Moody and Bloomberg. So for us to really know how much debt we are in, it's more of an issue of secrecy. So most of the policymakers in the country do not know the actual position, because if they issue out like the recent statement in the 2018 national budget, our projection was that we have about 47% of GDP is debt. So debt comprises about 47% of GDP. That's about $12 billion. So that's quite high, but that is not perhaps the correct figure. The Ministry of Finance recently upgraded the amount to say that external debt has now moved to about $9 billion US dollars. So if we put in the computation from international observers and everywhere else, I would safely say that the current situation is that we have debt about 16 billion US dollars.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if we talk about that figure, what is the impact on development financing?
So when we have high debt, it sends a signal to the international financial market that we are approaching debt distress. Recently, I think you are aware that the IMF upgraded the assessment about Zambia's debt distress levels, debt sustainability assessment. We know now that Zambia is now from medium level risk of distress, we are now going to high level of risk distress. That translates into higher yields on our Eurobonds, dampening of our credit rating. So we have already seen a 1-point reduction in our credit rating. So those are the implications. It means when we want to go and borrow for development financing, we have a problem because the interest rates are going to be very high for us to borrow. So that's what debt leads to in the international market.
Okay, now we know that, besides what is already on the ground, in terms of measures that government is taking to be able to cushion this debt situation that we're currently in, what is it, do you think, that is supposed to be employed to ensure that this debt challenge that Zambia is currently in is managed, it becomes sustainable?
Okay, so I think we have been talking about fiscal consolidation. I think starting from the understanding of debt itself, many of the concepts of debt are complex. So when we say fiscal consolidation, you need to explain what we're talking about. So basically, we want to narrow down the gap between expenditure and revenue. Okay, so we want the government to concentrate on, of course, domestic revenue collection, to increase their part of revenue, and also to reduce expenditure. So when the gap is narrowed down, obviously we'll have less reasons why we should contract more debt. So fiscal consolidation is the primary thing that many policymakers have been urging the government to take it up. And then, of course, apart from fiscal consolidation, we have the issue of the sinking fund. When the Eurobonds were contracted, a lot of people advised that we need to set up the sinking fund so that at the time when we reach 2022, the first.
By the way, why has that all of a sudden? Why is there this supposed inertia with regards to sinking fund? Is it there?
At the moment, no allocation is feasible in the public domain to say that the sinking fund has been set up. So we do not have any allocation. The first allocation was promised in the medium-term expenditure framework that we're going to establish the sinking fund, and then we shall allocate 100 million kwacha as just an initial one to set up the fund. But in the 2018 national budget, no such allocation was visible. So at this moment, I think it's safe to say that the sinking fund is not there.
Okay. Now, you see, if I mean, it's all in the public domain, when government did commit itself to ensuring that the sinking fund is established, but we haven't seen anything happening. Now, it brings me to the question of talk and action.
Yes.
So far, there has been more talk than commitment demonstrated through action. Therefore, should Zambians be worried that we will indeed sort out this challenge of debt if we can talk more than we act on what we say?
Yeah, I think you're right on the. I think there is no harmonization between some of the government policies. For example, the medium-term expenditure framework. What we observe there are some pronouncements of what can be done. But if you go deep into the document, you find that there are no operational targets. You don't have actual figures of what can be done. And then on top of that, you find that the national budget still prioritizes expenditure. Whilst the medium-term framework is saying that we're going to cut down on expenditure. So you find that there's this, more or less like there's no harmonization in terms of government policies. So coordination is required for people to be at ease that the government is doing something about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, moving on a little bit from there, IMF has been an option that, Zambia has at the moment to be able to ensure that our path to fiscal consolidation is actually sustainable and is on the right track.
Yes.
But we've seen no progress in that regard. What other alternatives does Zambia have?
IMF should not be considered to be a foregone alternative. I think as the Center for Trade Policy and Development, we are for the IMF bailout package. The reason is simple, because if you have a government which makes pronouncements...
But how will it help? How will it help in terms of paying this 750 million US dollars plus interest payment of 237.4 million US dollars?
Okay, so the basic mission of the IMF is to safeguard the international financial market. So in doing that, they will go and also supervise the economies of the member states. So in doing that, it means that, so they will look at if one of the member states has got, maybe let's say there's a high chance of distress. It means that the distress may affect the international market. So the IMF is very, very concerned about financial distress. And then you know that IMF gives concessional loans. So going to the financial market to get loans and high interest rates is not the same as the IMF loans. IMF loans are, some of them are zero interest loans. So it means that it is a viable option. The IMF is still a viable option that we should not just forget. So the government is supposed to create strategies to convince the IMF that they can do what they are saying and they can live up to the pronouncements that they're making. The problem that the IMF has with the Zambian government is there is no... So recently they submitted proposals. The IMF turned them down. The reason is they saw that despite the pronouncements, the strategies that the government is trying to talk about in terms of reducing expenditure, they're still proposing to contract debt at levels which are unsustainable, according to the IMF.
So if the IMF keeps on turning down the proposals that are given to ensure that we secure that bailout package, and, for reasons that government is not committing to each pronouncement, therefore, should we believe if the Minister of Finance says that Zambia is still in talks? Is this a dual conversation or it's a one-sided disposition owing to the fact that I'm simply telling you,
yes,
okay, what we want, but not committing to doing what is required of you to get what I want from you?
Okay, so with the IMF, there are terms and conditions for the loans. So a nation is supposed to submit a proposal. So Zambia has submitted proposals. The other one was rejected in February. Recently, we heard that the IMF again is pulling out. The reason is the proposal is not good enough. What the government is committing to, in the eyes of the IMF, is not going to be enough to deal with the debt distress. So the issue is that government should just sit back, arrange their priorities, look at different strategies, and submit a very good proposal. Then the IMF will take it up. That is what we need right now.
Okay, now we get to the issue of the elephant in the room. Recently, President Edgar Lungu, last week actually, announced that, there's a Turkish firm that has expressed interest to refinance Zambia's, fast approaching Eurobond, which is 750 million US dollars. Now, what I'd like to find out is, what is the implication of this consideration, peradventure it materializes?
Okay, so refinancing itself, maybe in layman's language, it means you contract a debt, maybe I borrow some money from you, and then I told you that I'll pay you back, let's say after a month. And then a month is approaching. So I decide to look for another person to get money from. So I get money from that person at perhaps better terms. For example, 2 months now. And then I give you back your money. So refinancing sends a very bad signal to the financial market, because it's more or less someone accepting that they are failed to pay their financial obligations. So they are looking for an alternative. Okay, so that's what refinancing does. It sends a very bad signal to the finance. You recently, I think you saw a statement from the Minister of Finance trying to assure the creditors that we're still committed, because there is need to assure them that we're still committed. if we're going for refinance.
Okay. Now, of course, people would be wondering, looking at the various exchange visits that have happened within the shortest possible of time. President Edgar Lungu travels for the inauguration of, President Erdogan, and then thereafter they meet in in South Africa for the BRICS summit, upon which, we're told that Zambia and both Turkey received special invitations. Thereafter, President Erdogan is here. One would be wondering, what is in all this for Turkey?
First of all, let's understand that this is not a bilateral loan. So by that it means that we're not getting a loan between governments. Okay, it's a firm in Turkey, which President Edgar Lungu was trying to ask the Turkish government to help facilitate for that loan to come through. So the loan is still going to be on. It's not concessional basis. It's going to be on market interest rates.
And yet the IMF advised that going forward, the loans that were supposed to be procuring or securing should be concessional.
Yes, yes. So we are wondering why that is the path that the government wants to take. The path of the IMF is a path of supervision, and perhaps it's not the best path for them, because when there is supervision, the Zambian people will be at ease, because there's someone watching over the pronouncements that are being made that we're going to have fiscal consolidation. But without anyone watching over, go behind, and then we have loans from Turkey at market interest rates. So that we are still wondering why. That is the policy of the government.
Okay. Now, in the past, money that has often been realized from these loans, for example, with China, we've seen that half the time it has been externalized through firms that would come, to be able to set up, for example, if we're constructing a road, we secure a particular loan, there are firms that would come. And that money would not actually even be within the Zambian system. It would straight go back to them. It is as if they never released it, and yet on paper, we have committed ourselves. So are we going to see Zambia improve in terms of negotiating to ensure that we get better conditions, that part of the money that will be secured if this deal materializes is domesticated?
Okay, so I don't really see a problem with development finance from China, because the Chinese government, the way they give loans is different from the way we got the Eurobonds, for example. So the loans are project financed loans. So, for example, you say you want to, the new international airport, we want to construct a new international airport. So then we contract a loan. They'll have terms and conditions that it will be perhaps constructed by a Chinese firm. The money would go straight to the Chinese firm. That is development finance. That's how it works. So the issue is, was that loan up to the value of what we have gotten? Have we gotten the correct quality of what we have gotten? And then, most importantly, is that a priority? Okay. So development finance is not really the problem. The Eurobonds, when they come in, they will go straight to the Bank of Zambia Treasury, and then the money will be dispersed for... it doesn't really add up anything, because development finance, I think, in my understanding, is actually better, because chances of diverting funds to other issues are minimized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Due to time constraints, Bright will definitely continue this conversation on a different date. You've been watching Biz-Week with me, Winston Mavoro, and today the focus of discussion has been debt refinancing. Is Zambia desperate? Emanating from the conversation are issues to do with putting the house in order, not ignoring the International Monetary Fund as a significant player to ensuring that Zambia's integrity on the financial market remains intact. My name is Winston Mavoro. My guest has been Bright Chizonde from the Center for Trade Policy and Development, who is a researcher and economist. Have a lovely evening.
Television reinvented.